You can believe me, or you can chalk it up to hotel lore. Either way, listen close, because this one changed me. For years, I worked security at all kinds of places, hotels, small resorts, the kind of properties that collect stories like dust. Workers pass these stories along between shifts. An old man who hanged himself in room 217, a maid who never left, a gardener who was found at dawn. You learn to nod, to smile, to tell your own story louder than theirs. I used to be the guy who rolled his eyes. I like to think I had reasons, logic, experience, the smell of cigarettes and cheap cologne that often passes for mystery. Then I worked at a place that used to be Gene Autry's house. It was split into 2 guest buildings, north and south, with paths and hedges carved through desert landscaping. There was a spa that called itself PSIC, Palm Springs Yacht Club, a ballroom, a kitchen, the Autry house itself, and paths that led you into little pockets of the property, a fireplace patch, a hammock grove, a pétanque court, a tennis court that kept its own hours. The guest rooms were painted a manic red, and the hallways so white they felt surgical. The place looked like a postcard and felt off. The spa had corridors that swallowed light. The Autry house was a C-shaped 2 wings, a main room connecting them old rugs, lion head faucets, a wall of masks that watched. There was a maintenance man named Mac, a green beret, a big man with fingers that had fixed everything from leaking boilers to broken bones. He told me stories. Not loudly. Not to impress the way a man tells the only stories that matter to him. Hammocks that would swing when no one was near. Lights on the tennis court that would blink themselves on and off. A woman in red, dancing alone in the ballroom. A pale figure, floating across the pool in Saig. Sometimes, Max said them like facts. Sometimes, like warnings. I tested him. I pressed him. He never lied. He only stopped telling me more. The stories were background noise for a while. Creaky phones, prankster coworkers, houses that looked scarier at night. My duty was simple. Check the vacant rooms, shut lights, set thermostats to 75, lock windows. Routine, safety, familiar. You get comfortable with the little anomalies. A phone that makes static, like someone breathing at the other end. A light that flickers because the bulb is tired. I learned to shrug at rustles and attribute odd things to wind, or wiring, or imagination. And then there was the night in room 46 Newtons. It was a second-floor room in the north building. I walked in the way I always did, flipped lights off from left to right, so I left the entry light on for the hallway. The room smelled faintly of bleach and a lemon that had been left too long. A bathroom with 2 French doors opened into the room. One door sat half closed, the bathroom light on. I pushed the door all the way back, reached in, and killed the light. That's when the air hit me. It washed over me like the door of a freezer had opened inside the room. I knew the feeling. Housekeeping sometimes turns thermostats low if they're sweating through sheets, but this was different. This was a hollow cold that sucked the heat out of your throat. My breath fogged for a second, little ghosts of steam that didn't belong in a Palm Springs night. I reached for the thermostat. I wanted to crank the heat, to prove there was a rational knob somewhere to blame, and before my fingers touched it, the bathroom door slammed. Hard. Not the polite thud of a spring-loaded commercial hinge, not a slam from a gust. Something folded the air and sent that thin wooden door against the jamb so fierce the whole room rattled. These doors were light. I could have thrown one, and it would have landed like a sigh. This one banged like a fist. The walls shivered with it. If you'd asked me then if I was scared, I would have tried to tell you no, but I ran 3 or 4 huge steps, the kind of running that doesn't feel like yours. I barreled out into the hallway and fumbled the deadbolt. The deadbolt ejected an ugly little metal spit into the frame and clanged like a gunshot. I stood there, chest heaving, the hallway lights humming, and I held the door shut with 2 hands because the idea of being back in that room with the door closed felt like being buried. I went back in. Of course I did. Terrible logic proof checking, driven by a stubborn need to show myself that I hadn't lost all usefulness. The door stayed closed. I threw it as hard as I could. It caught so much wind it slowed and barely kissed the frame. There were no springs. There were no drafts. The windows were latched. The floor did not slope like some cheap haunted house trick. I looked at the thermostat. 75 degrees. Normal. But just moments before, the air had been a coffin. I locked up and left. I never went back inside that room alone. After that, I stopped testing things. I turned lights off quick, checked mirrors for reflections before I gave them the second look, walked the long way past the garden so I wouldn't have to pass the Pétanque court at midnight. I told Mac what happened. He shrugged. "They make their presence known," he said. He smiled like a man who'd had his hand shaken by a force that had been there before he was and would remain when he was gone. It was the kind of acceptance that gets lodged in your mouth. People will offer explanations. Doors can be slammed by wind. Old buildings breathe. Thermostats can misread. We make narrative to survive the friction of the unknown. But those explanations don't account for the way the deadbolt popped out at the exact second I barreled into the hallway, or how the air in the room turned knives cold, then vanished into 75 degrees like someone had flipped a switch. They don't account for the way, after that night, I would avoid mirrors late, or how I'd hear a hammocks whisper and pretend I didn't. There are other incidents on that property that I never witnessed firsthand, but they hung in the air. A guard who quit after seeing a woman in a green sweater standing beside a bed. Chairs lined across the path by the Pétanque court despite no prints in the sand. A room service guy who left food at the Autry house and came back to find his path blocked, as if someone had stood up and arranged the chairs while he looked the other way. All the small beats of annoyance you would expect if a place wanted to be noticed. The creepiest part is, none of it felt malevolent, at least not at first. It felt like attention, like something pulling at the edges of your disbelief, just to test if you were paying attention. I thought ghosts, if there are ghosts, were theatrical. Maybe they are. Maybe they are small, petty things that like to tap the thermostat or swing a hammock. Maybe they like to see who will stand and who will run. But the night in 46 Newtons taught me something worse. It taught me they can be precise. They know where you will reach for the thermostat. They know when your hand is hesitating. They can make a light go out before you think to blame the bulb. They can be quiet until you say the words, "I don't believe in that," and then they act the part to prove you wrong. Mac told me they do that to people who don't believe. He said it like both a warning and an explanation, like he'd once been one of the doubters, and now he had stopped arguing with the world. I wanted to ask how long he'd seen things, what started it, why masks in that room made him uneasy. But those conversations die in hotels the way people do, quietly, in stairwells, over a stovetop that keeps bubbling away when you'd rather it not. Here's the part that keeps me awake sometimes. It wasn't like a monster leaping into the room. It was a small, surgical correction of my life's assumptions. It slammed a door and unhooked a bolt at the precise instant I tried to be brave. It didn't shout. It didn't need to. It simply reoriented me. The bravest thing I did that night was go back and test it. The stupidest thing I did was believe I could make it explain itself. If you ever find yourself in an old house with red rooms and white hallways, don't be proud. Don't be the skeptic who needs to punch a hole in every shadow. Close doors gently. Keep track of the thermostat. Don't stand in the center of a room and call it empty. And if a maintenance man with green beret hands tells you something, listen. There's more to the way old places remember people than we let ourselves admit. I don't go to the Autry house at night anymore. I pass by it and keep my eyes down. I tell newer guards the stories now, the same ones I once rolled my eyes at, because laughter makes a fine coat for fear, and we all need pockets to carry what keeps us from the dark. But sometimes, late, when the air chills in an empty room, I remember the slam. I remember the deadbolt. I remember the thermostat reading 75 degrees normal after something had reached into the room and folded the air like paper. And I think they were letting me know they were there. They were making sure I knew. So believe me, or don't, but if you end up in a hotel, with a spa called SIG and a wall of masks, and a maintenance man who tells stories while he polishes his tools, take his stories seriously. Because the real horror isn't the mask staring at you. It's realizing the place can make you believe it. If you've ever had a night like that, a door that slammed with no wind, a bolt that ejected like a heartbeat, cold that wasn't a draft comment below, tell us what the house did to you. Because stories like this don't die in the dark unless we let them. If you want more true accounts like this, like and subscribe. There are places that keep secrets and knives of cold that will cut through skepticism. And if you ever stand in front of a bathroom with French doors, for God's sake, check the mirror. Don't look across the patio. I was not happy when I learned our branch was being downsized. I thought I'd be fired, but instead, they transferred me to the Manchester branch. I wasn't thrilled, but at least I still had a job. Money was tight, so I couldn't just get an apartment right away. I decided to stay in a hotel for a couple of weeks while I settled in. After some searching, I landed on the Jackson Hotel, a small and cheap place, but close to work. The photos on their website made it look neat and welcoming. 5 minutes from my new office, and at first glance it seemed almost too good to be true. When I pulled into the small parking lot, I squeezed my car into a spot beside the quaint little building. The hotel sat on a long suburban road, lined with shops and shabby office blocks. I remember a fish and chip shop nearby called The Codfather, with a pun so bad it made me groan. With my luggage in hand, I pushed through the squeaking front doors. The smell hit me immediately, musty, heavy, damp. From the scent alone, I could tell the place didn't get many guests. The lobby was small, with old furniture shoved against the walls. The wallpaper was a sickly cream, peeling and sagging in places, as though the walls themselves were tired. Behind the desk sat an old woman sipping tea from a small china cup. Her name tag said Mary. She barely looked at me as I asked for my key, answering in hushed tones, grunts, and coughs. Her heart wasn't in it, and I didn't blame her. She slid me the key without ceremony and pointed me toward the hall. As I made my way down, I saw an old man with a cart full of cleaning supplies. His tag said Eddie. He scrubbed at a filthy door with such intensity it made the wood groan. When he saw me trying to open my door, number 17, he chuckled. Still facing the door he cleaned, he said, "Are you sure about that, lad?" I frowned. "Pardon?" I asked. He tilted his head just enough to let his words reach me. 17, he chuckled, repeating my room number. I asked who he was, and he pointed to his tag. "Eddie, been cleaning this place for years. Seen a lot of people come in and out." Then he smirked and muttered the number again. 17. Without explaining further, he went back to scrubbing. His cryptic tone unnerved me. Inside the room, however, things looked better. The musty hallway smell was gone. A flowery scent lingered in the air, and the room seemed much cleaner than the rest of the hotel. The carpet was soft, a light red. The walls were bright and almost new-looking. The king bed was neatly made with black sheets, pillows fluffed and perfect. I lay on it and felt myself sinking into the soft comfort. Beside the bed, I noticed a heavy brown door. It led to a long bathroom, tiled white, painted blue like the sea, with a rusting bathtub at the far end. The shower curtain hung loose, shadowing the vague shape of the tap. Something about the bathroom unsettled me, so I shut the door. I spent the day walking the city. By the time I returned, the sun had dipped low, and Mary still sat behind her desk with her tea, unchanged. I didn't see Eddie. I climbed back into my bed and pulled the covers up. Sleep didn't come easy, but eventually, I drifted off. That's when I heard it. A muffled sound beneath the creaks of the old building. It was faint, but I swore it sounded like a baby whimpering. I told myself I imagined it, and I went back to sleep. The next morning I left again to explore, but as I walked the streets, something felt wrong. The city seemed lonelier than the day before. People filled the sidewalks, but they walked hunched and joyless, like shadows. Passing a restaurant, I caught my reflection in the glass. My face looked pale, my eyes ringed black. my expression worn. I felt well rested, but my reflection told a different story. Unnerved, I returned to the hotel. On the way back, I stepped in dog filth hidden under leaves. Furious, I carried my ruined shoe into the hotel's public bathroom to clean it. While I scrubbed, the door creaked open. Eddie entered, rag in hand, watching me. He asked, "Too scared to do that in your room?" His tone made me pause. I asked what he meant. He chuckled and said the hotel was old, older than him, and that maybe not everyone who checked in ever left. When I stared at him, unsure if he was joking, he smirked and added, "Loosen up, kid. I'm just pulling your leg." I wasn't so sure. That night, the sounds came again. A sharp crack, like bones snapping low to the ground near my bed. Then another, from the opposite side. It sounded like something crawling around me. My skin prickled. I convinced myself it was just the building settling. I lay back down. That's when I heard sobbing, faint at first, then growing louder. It was coming from the bathroom. A woman crying. I got up, my heart hammering, and crept toward the door. The sobbing turned to wailing, anguished and raw. My hand trembled on the knob as I pushed it open. Silence hit me. The bathroom stretched long and empty, tiles gleaming faintly. But at the far end, behind the curtain, I saw the shape of someone in the bathtub. I whispered, "Hello? I think you have the wrong room." The curtain shifted. A dripping hand appeared, pulling it back. She rose from the tub, skin blue, stretched thin across bones. Her eyes sunken, her lips swollen purple. Hair hung in wet clumps like seaweed. Her body was emaciated, naked, water dripping from every hollow. Her jaw was open in a scream, but only gurgling sounds came out, like drowning. I ran to the door, but the handle wouldn't turn. Behind me, her feet smacked against tile, then carpet. She was close. I pounded and screamed until the door finally gave way. I stumbled into the hall and slammed it shut behind me. In that final glimpse, I saw her closing in, and something smaller, thrashing in the corner. A baby. I sprinted down the hallway, crashing into Eddie's cleaning cart. He shouted at me, but when I babbled about the woman in my room, he only frowned. I demanded answers. After a long pause, he sighed. He told me about Lucy, a girl who had lived nearby. She got pregnant, her father threw her out, and the boy who fathered the child abandoned her. She rented room 17. In desperation, she killed the baby and then drowned herself in the bathtub. Her body was found days later, the stench alerting staff. Ever since, guests claimed to see her ghost. Shaking, I refused to return to my room that night. I stayed with a coworker instead. In the morning, I went back to collect my things. The room was quiet, untouched. Mary was still at the desk when I checked out. When I told her I was leaving early, she smirked. "Saw him, did you?" she asked. Confused, I said, "I saw a woman." She frowned. Strange. Most guests in room 17 say they see the man who killed her, the hangman. Eddie, his name was. Her words made my blood run cold. Eddie, the cleaner, the man I had spoken to, the one who had told me her story. I never went back to the Jackson Hotel. I found a flat in the city, swore I was safe. But last night, just as I was drifting to sleep, I heard something at the foot of my bed, not crying. Not bone snapping, just the steady sound of rope swinging. If this story kept you up tonight, imagine what waits in the next one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because the dark never sleeps, and neither do the stories.